Number 1, Zakieya Latrice Avery. Zakieya Latrice Avery was 28 years old when she was arrested in Germantown, Maryland in January 2014. A mother of 4, Avery worked as a pharmacy technician and was known to friends and family as soft-spoken and attentive toward her children. Publicly, she presented as a caring parent navigating the difficulties of single motherhood following a separation from her children's father. But beneath this exterior, Avery battled long-standing mental health challenges, including hospitalizations for delusions and mood instability. In the months before the tragedy, Avery became increasingly consumed by spiritual fears. She joined a small religious circle she referred to as the Demon Assassins, believing they were engaged in a war against evil spirits. Avery's role within the group was self-appointed commander, responsible for identifying and casting out demons she believed inhabited those around her, even her own children. According to court records, she claimed to see black clouds hovering over their bodies and eyes that turned dark signs she interpreted as possession. On the night of January 17, 2014, Avery acted on those beliefs. Inside her modest townhouse, she attempted what she described as an exorcism. Convinced her youngest children, 18-month-old Norel and 2-year-old Ziana, were overtaken by demons, she attacked them during the ritual. Their older siblings, ages 5 and 8, were also harmed but survived. Avery later told investigators she believed she was saving their souls rather than committing harm. Neighbors first grew alarmed when they noticed unusual behavior outside the home, including a child left unattended in a car. Hours later, another neighbor spotted a bloody knife and called 911. When police entered the home, they discovered 2 deceased toddlers and 2 critically injured siblings. Avery fled briefly but was quickly apprehended nearby. The case shocked Maryland and drew national media attention. Prosecutors initially charged Avery with multiple counts of first-degree murder and attempted murder. During legal proceedings, psychiatric evaluations revealed diagnoses of bipolar disorder and borderline personality disorder, with experts concluding she had been experiencing psychosis during the incident. In 2016, the court found Avery not criminally responsible and committed her to a maximum security psychiatric hospital rather than prison, where she remains indefinitely. Psychologists interpreting Avery's case describe her actions as delusionally motivated, an act of misguided protection rooted in religious paranoia rather than malice. She appeared calm in court, offering little outward remorse, but consistently claiming she believed she was saving her children from evil. The tragedy leaves an unsettling question. When love, faith, and psychosis collide, how do we measure responsibility? Avery's case remains a haunting example of devotion distorted by delusion. A mother certain she was rescuing her children, yet forever remembered for taking them from the world. Number 2, Morgan Lane Arnold. Morgan Lane Arnold was just 17 at the time of her sentencing in January 2016, having pleaded guilty to first-degree murder in the death of her father, 58-year-old Dennis Lane, a well-known real estate executive and blogger from Ellicott City, Maryland. At the time of the crime, in May 2013, she was only 14 and a high school student. Before the tragedy, Morgan lived as a typical teenager. Her mother described her as quiet, creative, and close to family. She had no known criminal history and seemed socially engaged, keeping friendships and school interests. She did not present a public image marked by danger or instability. Signs of emotional turmoil began to emerge from Morgan's private journals and conversations. Prosecutors later noted that she had grown resentful toward her father, claiming she felt controlled and frustrated by her home life. As a young teen, she reportedly struggled with mental health issues. Her mother publicly stated that Morgan had significant psychological needs and had been denied appropriate care. These unresolved tensions appeared to escalate over time, culminating in planning episodes. In May 2013, Morgan orchestrated a chilling plan. She invited her then-boyfriend, 19-year-old Jason Bulmer, to her father's home. She unlocked a basement screen door to allow him entry. Bulmer entered carrying a butcher knife and approached her sleeping father. In the early morning hours, Dennis Lane was stabbed multiple times and died inside his home. Bulmer later told police, "I am her boyfriend. I stabbed him and she told me to. Prosecutors uncovered text messages in which Morgan instructed him on how and when to carry out the attack, including targeting the throat up to 10 times. The investigation unfolded swiftly. Police arrested Bollmer inside the home covered in blood. They later arrested Morgan. Electronic devices seized from her home revealed the extent of premeditation, showing planning discussions over weeks. The case gained local and national attention, sending ripples through both the real estate blogging community and the wider Maryland public. In May 2015, Morgan pleaded guilty to first-degree murder in a deal that dropped additional charges. Though initially charged as an adult, her defense argued for her youth and psychological immaturity. Ultimately, in January 2016, a Howard County judge sentenced her to 30 years in prison, followed by 5 years of probation upon release. Bollmer received a matching 30-year sentence. Experts and Morgan's defense emphasized her emotional immaturity, unresolved trauma, and lack of mental health support. Her mother described the act as the result of a deeply troubled psyche, asserting that Morgan's actions did not occur in a vacuum and reflected severe psychological distress. Prosecutors opposed an insanity plea, citing the calculated nature of the crime and clear planning. Morgan's story raises urgent questions about age mental health and justice. How do we hold someone accountable when they're still developing emotionally and cognitively? How should mental illness factor into punishment versus rehabilitation at such a young age? As the courtroom doors closed on her youth, Morgan Lane Arnold's case became more than a sensational headline. It became a tragic portrait of a troubled teenager whose pain planning and misplaced loyalty led to a horror no one could reclaim. The final question lingers when youth love resentment and mental illness converge. How thin is the line between victim and perpetrator? Number 3, Marie Anastasi. Marie Anastasi was 44 at the time she entered a judicial proceeding in December 2016. She was known publicly as a long-term resident of Lothian, Maryland, a mother of 5, and a former office worker. Before the events that unfolded in October 2015, she was seen by neighbors and acquaintances as a quietly suffering mother, married for nearly 2 decades, but increasingly isolated by marital tension. She maintained a modest public presence and was not known to the authorities for violent behavior. The relationship with her husband, Anthony Anastasi Jr., had become fraught. Police documents and pretrial interviews revealed years of domestic conflict with Anthony, continuing a romantic relationship with their live-in tenant, Jacqueline Riggs, a woman in her mid-20s who had become romantically involved with both Anne and Anthony. Those involved in the case described a strained love triangle. Anne allegedly felt betrayed and desperate, viewing Riggs as an existential threat to her family's stability. Her daughter said Anne had grown afraid, resentful, and emotionally volatile in the weeks before the tragedy. Text messages later discovered showed Anne in contact with her teenage daughter and her daughter's then boyfriend, discussing plans that would soon lead to death. On October 5th, 2015, at the family's home in Lothian, Anne reportedly called 911, claiming her husband had committed suicide. Police responded to find Anthony deceased in their shared bedroom with a gun nearby. Meanwhile, in the basement lived Jacqueline Riggs, who was also found dead. Initially staged as a murder-suicide, the scene raised suspicion. Forensic investigators discovered inconsistencies. The weapon next to Anthony did not match the caliber of the bullet, and gunshot residue was detected on Anne's clothing and body. In the basement, evidence indicated Jacqueline had died from multiple wounds consistent with an attack. Ballistics and forensic analysis confirmed these were homicides, not self-inflicted death. Authorities subsequently took Anne, her 13-year-old daughter, and the daughter's 18-year-old boyfriend, Gabriel Struss, into custody. Cell phone records and text exchanges showed Anne had contacted Struss, instructing him to commit the murders and arrange details. Struss later admitted he carried out the shootings and stabbing, allegedly believing he was doing so at Anne's direction. According to investigators, Anne used her daughter and her daughter's boyfriend to carry out the attacks, manipulating minors into executing her plan. The legal case moved quickly. In December 2016, Anastasi entered an Alford plea to 2 counts of first-degree murder and use of a firearm during a violent crime. An Alford plea allows a defendant to acknowledge that the prosecution's evidence is sufficient for conviction while still asserting innocence. In May 2017, the court handed down effective consecutive sentences. She must serve 60 years behind bars, the full portion remaining active her husband and his lover's deaths, each carrying concurrent terms, all but 40 years suspended for one, all but 60 for the other. Throughout the case, State's Attorney Wes Adams described her as a cold and calculating figure who destroyed multiple lives by manipulating young people into committing violence. Prosecutors argued she orchestrated the murders with a calculated detachment, while defense attorneys raised claims of domestic abuse, psychological distress, and emotional breakdown over time. The jury and judge ultimately found her culpable mathsing manipulation with punishment. Anne's motivations seem rooted in jealousy, fear, and a sense of betrayal. Experts noted her ability to orchestrate such violence using her daughter's boyfriend as a trigger man reveals a deeply disturbed capacity for control. Psychological reports suggest she felt powerless in her relationship and sought to reclaim agency through extreme means. Her case leaves us with haunting echoes, a tangled love triangle, shattered families, and a mother who turned to manipulation and murder instead of confrontation or healing. Marie Anastasi's story is a stark example when emotional turmoil, jealousy, and calculated planning converge. How far can someone fall before redemption becomes impossible? Number 4, Brandi Upshur. Brandi Upshur was 40 years old when she was tried and convicted in 2018. A resident of Salisbury, Maryland, she had no known criminal history prior to the fatal incident. Publicly, Upshur lived what appeared to be a typical life, a mother and community member, until July 2017, when her life and the lives of those around her changed forever. Tensions reportedly grew after financial disputes surfaced. Prosecutors later revealed that Upshur believed her longtime boyfriend, 32-year-old Tavin Moloch, had taken money from her. Friends and acquaintances described her as increasingly agitated in the days before the incident. While no formal psychological evaluation was publicly disclosed, the emotional strain and financial grievance appear to have triggered a planned confrontation that would escalate beyond control. On July 30th, 2017, Upshur orchestrated a group assault on Moloch. According to court documents, she gathered several associates under the premise of confronting him over the alleged theft. What began as a planned robbery turned into a violent group attack. Moloch was chased through the streets, assaulted by multiple people, and ultimately stabbed. He collapsed on a front lawn and later died from his injuries. The investigation moved quickly. Witnesses reported seeing a group chasing and attacking Moloch, with one recalling someone shouting about retrieving money. Another neighbor described seeing the victim flee to a porch before collapsing. Forensic evidence and witness testimony soon tied the assault to Upshur and her group of accomplices. Her trial was handled by a judge rather than a jury. In May 2018, the court found her guilty of first-degree felony murder, robbery, conspiracy, and related charges. Prosecutors described Upshur as the instigator, the person who set events in motion and directed the fatal confrontation. During sentencing, Moloch's family expressed both sorrow and relief, stating that justice had finally been served after a harrowing year. In July 2018, Upshur received a life sentence in the Maryland Department of Corrections. She will not be eligible for parole for decades. The judge emphasized the severity of her role in orchestrating the crime, noting that the planned robbery directly led to a man's death and devastated multiple families. Psychological motivations appear rooted in resentment and a belief of betrayal. Testimony revealed that Upshur repeatedly demanded repayment from Moloch and encouraged others to retrieve her money. There is no public record of a mental illness defense or official psychological diagnosis, suggesting her actions were driven by anger and deliberate planning rather than psychosis. Brandi Upshur's story highlights how financial conflict and personal grievances can spiral into irreversible tragedy. It raises an unsettling question: how does someone cross the line from confrontation to orchestration of a killing, and can that line ever be crossed back? Number 5, Bobbie Sue Hodge. Bobbie Sue Hodge was 63 at the time she was convicted by a Harford County jury in October 2022. A resident of Edgewood, Maryland, she rented a basement room in a crowded townhouse that housed multiple occupants. In the months prior, she appeared isolated and was reportedly facing eviction. Neighbors described her as tense and troubled, often leaving the kitchen stove on and making veiled threats about burning the home. The situation worsened in the weeks before May 2019. Hodge's eviction loomed, creating emotional strain and desperation. Investigators also reported her making repeated comments about wanting to set the house ablaze, a sign that the conflict had escalated beyond mere frustration. These remarks, combined with her precarious housing situation and growing hostility, suggest a motive grounded in perceived threat to her security and stability. In the early hours of May 9, 2019, at approximately 2:30 a.m., a fire broke out at the Edgewood townhouse. Hodge lived in the basement and was seen moving away from a couch on the second floor just before the flames spread. She escaped, fully clothed and carrying personal belongings. Meanwhile, 3 residents on the third floor perished from smoke and burns. A 4th victim was rescued but died from injuries sustained 8 months later. 3 other occupants leapt from upper floors to escape, sustaining serious injuries. Fire crews responding to the scene discovered multiple homes damaged by the blaze, and investigators determined the fire was intentionally set, caused by the deliberate introduction of an open flame to combustibles. Police conducted interviews with survivors' neighbors and Hodge herself, while the state fire marshal and federal investigators collaborated on forensic analysis. A pattern emerged that her behavior before and after the fire, combined with witness accounts and fire origin evidence, pointed to arson and deadly intent. Hodge's escape with her possessions unburned and largely unaffected further raised suspicion. At trial, the jury convicted Hodge on 4 counts of first-degree felony murder and 3 counts of second-degree assault related to escaping occupants. The verdict came after a multi-day trial concluding in October 2022. Prosecutors labeled her actions as calculated and vengeful, an act committed in search of retaliation over eviction rather than in panic. Originally sentenced to life prison terms, plus additional years for the assaults, Hodge's conviction was later remanded after an appellate court found procedural errors regarding her representation. She was retried and in July 2025 received a new sentence, 180 years in prison, 40 years for each murder count, and additional years for assault charges, all running consecutively, ensuring she will remain incarcerated for life. Experts and prosecutors point to revenge born from desperation and perceived injustice as her psychological motivators. Hodge's repeated verbal threats, her behavior leading up to the fire, and her escape strategy suggest a deliberate intention rather than a spontaneous act. While there is no public record of a formal psychological diagnosis, the case reflects a person driven to violence through resentment and fear. This killing fire ripped apart families and upended the lives of survivors. Bobbie Sue Hodge's story is a haunting reminder that denial and despair can ignite devastating tragedy. She ignited more than a blaze. She burned trust, safety, and lives. The final question echoes long after sentencing. When displacement and desperation collide, how far can one go before redemption becomes impossible? Number 6, Leaundra Kim Matthews. Leaundra Kim Matthews was 25 at the time of her conviction in August 2023. She lived in Occoquan, Maryland, and at 19 years old was a young mother. Before the tragedy, Matthews appeared to lead a typical adolescence. She shared a close bond with her twin sister, maintained ties within her neighborhood, and quietly balanced parenthood and life in Montgomery County. In the months leading to March 2017, family tensions escalated. According to prosecutors, Christian Matthews, Leaundra's 17-year-old brother, had allegedly threatened her and her daughter. Investigators later uncovered messages indicating Leaundra feared for their safety. Internal family conflict, particularly surrounding her boyfriend Tyson Lipford, and Christian's strained relationship with him, reportedly fueled the tension. Her twin sister, LeMay, later told officials that Leaundra had insisted Christian had to go, suggesting that her concerns had crossed from fear to a fatal plan. On the early morning of March 21, 2017, Christian was asleep in the basement of the family townhouse in Silver Spring. Around 2:25 a.m., Leaundra drove to pick up her boyfriend Lipford and his associate Daniel Howard. She confirmed Christian's bedroom location and access points. Lipford entered the house and strangled Christian while Howard helped restrain him. Afterward, Leaundra drove the two away from the scene. When chaos erupted upstairs, her twin sister called 911, pretending to have just discovered the body part of a cover-up planned in advance to mislead police. Detectives quickly grew suspicious of the story. Inconsistencies in statements, combined with digital evidence retrieved from phones, revealed the plot. Text documented step-by-step planning from timing and method to instructions for cleaning up afterward. Eventually, investigators charged Leaundra LeMay Lipford and Howard with conspiracy to commit murder and related offenses. Her trial concluded in August 2023 with a jury convicting her of second-degree murder. Prosecutors emphasized her role as the architect of the plan, the driver, the coordinator, and the one who staged the false discovery. In February 2024, Leaundra was sentenced to 25 years in prison, followed by 5 years of probation upon release. Her twin sister pleaded guilty to being an accessory after the fact and awaits sentencing, while Lipford is already serving 30 years for carrying out the attack. Howard faces his own proceedings separately. Defense attorneys pointed to a backdrop of alleged abuse and trauma, arguing that Leaundra believed she was protecting herself and her child. Psychological experts noted the complicated family dynamics at play, where loyalty, fear, and resentment became dangerously intertwined. Although the court did not accept a full mental health defense, it acknowledged the emotional turmoil present in the family's history. Christian's death shattered the Matthews family and left the community grappling with questions about love, fear, and betrayal. When self-preservation collides with family loyalty, where does justice lie, and how do we measure accountability when the danger feels as real as the bond itself? Number 7, Christina Gail Harnish. Christina Gail Harnish was 45 years old at the time. She pleaded guilty in early 2023 to second-degree murder in Anne Arundel County, Maryland. A resident of Tucson, Arizona at the time of arrest, she had previously lived in Annapolis with her former roommate Megan Tillman and Tillman's elderly mother. Before the crime unfolded in fall of 2017, Harnish appeared socially engaged roommates involved in a shared household. She wasn't publicly known for violent behavior, and her life seemed unremarkable until it fell apart. The psychological and situational triggers emerged when Megan Tillman, who had supported both Harnish and her co-defendant William Rice, financially ceased providing assistance. Investigators later described a troubling dynamic: Tillman vulnerable and, according to defense, intellectually disabled, offered trust and companionship that Harnish and Rice exploited. When the financial support ended, the relationship soured. Prosecutors framed Harnish as someone who betrayed that trust and manipulated a dependent roommate for personal gain. In the fall of 2017, Tillman abruptly disappeared. Her family reported her missing when they lost contact. Suspicious messages and altered social media activity raised concern. In October, human remains washed ashore in Shadyside, confirmed by the medical examiner to be Tillman's. Her disappearance triggered a cold case investigation spanning years. Meanwhile, Rice was observed driving Tillman's car to ATM machines around the time she vanished, while Harnish shared photos of herself with that vehicle while preparing to rehome Tillman's pet. Eventually, the car was found abandoned near a bus depot. When investigators finally connected Rice and Harnish to the scene, both fled Maryland by bus to Arizona, where they remained until their arrest in early 2022. Their extradition back to Maryland led to formal charges. In January of 2023, both Harnish and Rice pleaded guilty in Anne Arundel County Circuit Court to second-degree murder in connection with Tillman's death. Prosecutors described their actions as cruel betrayal enemies disguised as friends who took advantage of a trusting woman until it cost her life. In May 2023, an Anne Arundel County judge sentenced Harnish to the maximum 40 years in prison, calling the crime senseless, thoughtless, and heinous. Rice received an identical sentence. State's attorney Ann Colt Lightus stated that Tillman was a vulnerable woman who was killed by people she trusted. The judge noted the circumstantial nature of the case, but affirmed its strength, holding both defendants fully accountable. Tillman's family, long haunted by uncertainty, expressed relief that justice was finally served. Psychologically, Harnish's motives appear rooted in manipulation and opportunism rather than emotional impulse. Prosecutors and investigators pointed to the exploitation of a vulnerable woman, financial dependence, emotional influence, and betrayal. Defense teams offered explanations involving complex personal history and alleged previous trauma, but experts emphasized deliberate planning and conscious intent rather than precipitating mental breakdown. Her story emphasizes the dark convergence of trust and exploitation. When someone invites you into their life and then leverages that closeness for profit and betrayal, the consequences can be fatal. Christina Harnish's involvement in this case is a chilling example of betrayal, masked as intimacy trust destroyed for gain. In the end, one voice still echoes, Megan Tillman is gone, and those she trusted now carry the weight of her absence. The final question lingers. How do we guard against those who cloak manipulation in friendship, and can justice ever heal the betrayal? Number 8, Nicole Michelle Johnson. Nicole Michelle Johnson was 36 years old when she stood before a Baltimore County courtroom in 2023 pleading guilty to the murders of her young niece and nephew. Before her name became synonymous with tragedy, Johnson lived a life largely out of public view. She had no prominent career and was described by neighbors as quiet and reclusive. Her family ties, however, were complex. In 2019, Johnson's sister, struggling with personal challenges, entrusted her with the care of 2 young children, 7-year-old Jocelyn Johnson and 5-year-old Larry O'Neill. At first, this arrangement seemed temporary, but as months passed, the children's mother never reclaimed them, and Johnson's role shifted from caretaker to sole guardian. Over time, cracks began to show. Friends and extended relatives later testified that Johnson appeared overwhelmed and isolated. Financial strain, unstable housing, and a lack of support deepened her stress. Investigators later suggested she may have experienced untreated mental health issues, though no formal diagnosis was recorded in court. Whatever the cause, resentment toward the children seemed to build a tragic brew of frustration and neglect that would ultimately end in catastrophe. The crimes came to light in July 2021. Baltimore County Police pulled Johnson over during a routine traffic stop in Essex. Her car, in disrepair and missing proper registration, was filled with belongings. But what shocked officers was what they found in the trunk: a suitcase and a plastic tote containing the decomposed remains of Jocelyn and Larry. Johnson confessed on the scene. She admitted that more than a year earlier, in May 2020, she struck Jocelyn during a moment of anger. The child died, and Johnson hid her body in the suitcase. 2 months later, Larry died as well, reportedly from illness or neglect, and Johnson placed him in the tote alongside his sister. Autopsies revealed severe malnutrition. Both children weighed barely over 20 pounds, indicating prolonged starvation or neglect. Johnson never sought medical help, never alerted authorities, and continued living with the children's remains in her vehicle for over a year. The discovery horrified the community and investigators alike, raising anguished questions about how such suffering could remain hidden for so long. The legal proceedings concluded in 2023 when Johnson entered a guilty plea to 2 counts of murder. The court sentenced her to life in prison, suspending all but 50 years. This effectively ensures she will spend most of her remaining life behind bars. Parole eligibility, if ever granted, will not come until she is well into her senior years. Nicole Johnson's case underscores the devastating consequences of untreated stress, isolation, and neglect. 2 young lives entrusted to an aunt for safekeeping were instead met with unimaginable betrayal. As the courtroom closed on her sentencing, one haunting question remained: how do children fall through every safety net unnoticed until it is far too late? Number 9, Renee Denise BOWMAN. Renee BOWMAN was 44 years old when she was convicted in 2010 for the murders of 2 of her adopted daughters. A former resident of Montgomery County, Maryland, BOWMAN's life had, on the surface, seemed like an act of generosity. She adopted 3 young girls from the foster system, each with special needs, and collected monthly subsidies from the District of Columbia designed to support such adoptions. To outside observers, she appeared to be providing a stable home. But behind closed doors, the reality was far darker. BOWMAN's personal life was marked by instability. She had filed for bankruptcy only years before the adoption, struggled with employment, and frequently moved homes. Friends described her as private and controlling. Investigators later revealed that BOWMAN locked her daughters in a room with a reverse doorknob and forced them to use a bucket as a toilet. Early warning signs of neglect and abuse hidden from public view. By 2006, the situation inside the BOWMAN household turned deadly. Prosecutors argued that BOWMAN deliberately suffocated her 2 eldest daughters, Minette and Jasmine, then ages 9 and 7. Rather than report their deaths, she placed their bodies in a freezer and continued collecting adoption subsidies. Over the following years, she moved multiple times, transporting the freezer with her each time. To neighbors and social agencies, she maintained the appearance of a single mother, struggling quietly but coping, concealing the horrific truth within her home. The case came to light in September 2008 when BOWMAN's surviving daughter, then 7 years old, escaped by jumping out of a second-story window. She was discovered bruised and injured by neighbors who alerted authorities. When police entered the home, they uncovered the freezer in the basement. Inside were the remains of Minette and Jasmine, preserved in ice for over 2 years. Autopsies later confirmed the girls had died of asphyxiation. BOWMAN initially claimed the children had died accidentally, one from starvation and the other from a fall. But investigators gathered testimony from the surviving daughter, physical evidence from the freezer, and even statements BOWMAN later made to a fellow inmate, ultimately proving intentional murder. In 2010, Renee BOWMAN was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms without parole, plus 75 additional years for child abuse and related charges. The judge called her actions brutal, almost beyond human comprehension, condemning the betrayal of trust given to her as an adoptive parent. BOWMAN offered a muted apology in court, but displayed little visible emotion. Psychologists and prosecutors alike characterized BOWMAN's motive as a disturbing mix of financial exploitation and cruelty. She had sought subsidies, yet treated the children as burdens rather than family. The BOWMAN case stands as a haunting reminder systems built to protect vulnerable children can fail sometimes catastrophically, and when a caregiver becomes the very source of harm, the betrayal cuts deeper than any crime against a stranger. Number 10, Josephine Virginia Gray. Josephine Virginia Gray, known in the press as the Black Widow, was 55 when she was finally arrested in 2001 after decades of suspicion surrounding the deaths of 3 men in her life. Born in 1946 and raised in Maryland, Gray grew up in modest circumstances. By the 1970s, she was a mother of 6 and working as a custodian. Outwardly, she appeared ordinary, a woman focused on family and survival. Yet behind closed doors, her relationships were marked by volatility control and whispers of something darker, her alleged use of voodoo to intimidate those around her. The first tragedy struck in March 1974 when Gray's husband, Norman Stribling, was found shot in the head. Friends recalled that Stribling had confided fears for his life, even telling some that his wife had once aimed a gun at him. Despite suspicions, charges never stuck, and Josephine collected $16,000 in life insurance In the years that followed, Gray married William Robert Gray, a man with whom she had been romantically involved before Norman's death. Their relationship was equally troubled. By 1990, William was estranged and openly telling friends and police that his wife was trying to kill him. He even changed several insurance policies to remove her name. But in November of that year, William Gray was found shot to death in his apartment. Josephine once again collected thousands of dollars in benefits. Her final known victim boyfriend, Clarence Good, shared similar fears. In 1996, he was found shot in the head, his body left in the trunk of his car. Just months earlier, he had taken out a $100 000 life insurance policy, naming Josephine as the sole beneficiary. After his death, she claimed nearly the entire payout. Over 20 years, 3 men, all tied to her romantically, had died violently, and each time she profited financially. What kept her free for so long were the witnesses, family, and acquaintances terrified of her reputation for practicing voodoo. Prosecutors later described a climate of fear where potential testimony dissolved under threats both real and perceived. Rumors of hexes and curses silenced people for decades, stalling justice. In 2002, Gray was finally convicted not of murder, but of mail-in wire fraud tied to the insurance payouts. Federal prosecutors used the Slayer's rule, barring individuals from profiting off deaths they caused to secure her conviction. She was sentenced to 40 years in prison, a term reaffirmed after appeal in 2006. Josephine Gray's story is chilling not only for the deaths themselves, but for the manipulation and fear that shielded her for so long. As prosecutors put it, some chapters of her life were written in the blood of 3 men who loved her. The question that lingers is how many warnings must be ignored before patterns become undeniable, and how long can charm and fear hide the truth? Number 11, Kimberly Hricko. Kimberly Hricko was 33 years old when she was arrested for the death of her husband, Stephen Hricko, in what would later be called the murder mystery weekend killing. A surgical technician from Maryland, Kimberly's life outwardly seemed stable, a respectable job, a 9-year marriage, and a daughter. Yet beneath that image, friends described a woman increasingly unhappy, in her relationship confiding that she longed for escape and even hinting at fantasies of life without Stephen. The couple's marriage was strained. They had sought counseling, but arguments persisted over finances, fidelity, and intimacy. Kimberly's co-workers testified later that she had spoken openly about her dissatisfaction and, disturbingly, about wanting her husband dead. These comments, dismissed at first as venting, would take on new weight when tragedy struck. On Valentine's weekend in 1998, the couple checked into a golf resort on Maryland's eastern shore. The getaway featured a playful murder mystery tense play, an ironic backdrop for what was about to unfold. After the performance, guests were meant to solve a fictional crime. Hours later, the fiction turned real. The Hrickos' room caught fire in the middle of the night, and Stephen was found dead inside. Kimberly, appearing distraught, claimed she had left the room during an argument and returned to find it in flames. Initial suspicion of an accident quickly shifted. Autopsy results revealed no alcohol or carbon monoxide in Stephen's system, meaning he died before the fire began. Investigators concluded he had been poisoned with succinylcholine, a surgical muscle relaxant that paralyzes the body and is notoriously hard to detect after death. The drug was readily available in the operating room where Kimberly worked. Prosecutors argued she used it to incapacitate her husband, then set the fire to mask the crime and claim $400 000 in life insurance benefits. Evidence against Kimberly was circumstantial but compelling. Friends testified she had offered money to have her husband killed. Witnesses noted inconsistencies in her story, and the unlikely 2-hour drive she claimed she spent lost her insistence on immediate cremation and her unusual interest in the medical examiner's report. These factors painted a picture of premeditation. In January 1999, a jury convicted Kimberly Hricko of first-degree murder and first-degree arson. She was sentenced to life in prison plus 30 years. Appeals followed, but the verdict stood. For Stephen's family, the sentence offered closure, though no measure of justice could undo their loss, motives in this case remain debated. Prosecutors cited financial gain and resentment toward Stephen. Kimberly maintains her innocence to this day. Was she a calculating killer or a wrongfully convicted woman trapped by circumstantial evidence? As the trial judge observed at sentencing, "You sentenced an innocent man to death in the dawn of his life." Whether Kimberly's actions were driven by desperation or cold calculation, the case still haunts those who lived through it, a real-life tragedy that began with a game of make-believe. Number 12, Mary C. Koontz. Mary C. Koontz was 60 years old when she stood trial for the murder of her estranged husband, Ronald Koontz, a respected former teacher and school administrator. A longtime Baltimore County educator herself, Mary's life appeared ordinary from the outside. She had built a family with Ron, raised 3 children, and spent decades working in classrooms. Yet, behind closed doors, the family struggled with years of marital tension, emotional outbursts, and Mary's growing instability. By the late 2000s, the Koontz marriage had collapsed. Ron had sought a court order to remove Mary from the family home in Glen Arm, citing her unpredictable anger and concern for the safety of their teenage daughter, Kelsey. Mary relocated to Florida, but separation did not bring peace. Friends and family later described dozens of calls she made daily, many laced with hostility, jealousy, and accusations toward both Ron and their daughter. It was clear that Mary's isolation was deepening into resentment. On the morning of June 19th, 2009, the simmering conflict reached a tragic breaking point. Mary traveled from Florida back to Maryland carrying a .38 caliber revolver she had purchased and learned to use. Using a spare key, she entered the family's Glen Arm home. Inside, Ron and Kelsey were asleep. Prosecutors would later say Mary ambushed her husband, shooting him 4 times. When Kelsey awoke to the commotion, she saw her mother aiming the gun in her direction and fled, locking herself in her room to call our 911. By the time police arrived, Ron had wrestled Mary to the ground outside the house, gravely wounded but still conscious. He was transported to the hospital where he died of his injuries. Mary was immediately taken into custody. In court, she described the shooting as surreal, saying she felt as if she were watching a movie and had no memory of pulling the trigger. Her defense argued she was suffering from dissociative mental disorders and lacked criminal responsibility. The jury, however, was unconvinced. They heard testimony about Mary's escalating anger, her frequent threats, and the obsessive phone calls that preceded the killing. They learned she had even left hostile voicemails accusing her husband of inappropriate behavior toward their daughter, accusations that were unfounded and deeply hurtful to the family. Convicted of first-degree murder and attempted murder, Mary Koontz received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. In court, she turned to her daughter and apologized a moment that brought little comfort to Kelsey, who told reporters she was simply relieved the trial was over and that her mother would not be free again. The case left lingering questions about mental illness, domestic estrangement, and responsibility. As Kelsey later said, bad things can happen to people, but you have to choose how to respond. For the Koontz family, that choice came too late and cost them everything. Number 13, Brittany Norwood. Brittany Norwood was 29 years old when she became the center of one of Maryland's most shocking murder cases. A former college soccer player and employee at Lululemon Athletica in Bethesda, she came from a large family in Washington state and was described by many as ambitious, friendly, and outgoing. On the surface, there was little to suggest the darkness that would later emerge, but those close to her noticed patterns, trouble keeping jobs, rumors of theft, and conflicts that followed her from school to the workplace. By early 2011, Brittany's life seemed adrift. She had moved frequently, struggled financially, and faced mounting personal stress. Prosecutors later suggested that this instability combined with feelings of shame and resentment set the stage for a confrontation that spiraled beyond control. On March 11th, 2011, Brittany closed the Lululemon store alongside her co-worker, 30-year-old Jana Murray, a graduate student known for her kindness and adventurous spirit. After leaving, Brittany called Gina, claiming she'd forgotten her wallet. The two returned to the store together. What unfolded next shocked the community. A violent struggle erupted, reportedly sparked by suspicions that Brittany had been stealing merchandise. In the aftermath, Brittany attempted to conceal the truth. She inflicted superficial wounds on herself, tied her own hands and ankles, and staged the scene to look like a robbery by two masked men. When police arrived the following morning, Brittany presented herself as a victim who had miraculously survived a brutal attack. Her account initially sparked fear across Bethesda as residents worried that violent intruders were on the loose, but investigators quickly found inconsistencies. There were only 2 sets of footprints in the blood, both belonging to store employees. The supposed stolen items were linked back to Brittany. Workers in the Apple store next door reported hearing 2 women arguing not men's voices. And most damning of all forensic evidence showed the elaborate staging was a calculated attempt to mislead authorities. Brittany was arrested within a week. At trial, her defense conceded she killed Gina, but argued it was a crime of passion, not premeditation. The prosecution countered that the sheer brutality of the attack, coupled with the meticulous cover-up, revealed intent and malice. After just an hour of deliberation, the jury found her guilty of first-degree murder. In 2012, Brittany Norwood was sentenced to life in prison without parole. During sentencing, the judge acknowledged her troubled background, but focused on the devastation left behind. "You will see another sun rise," he told her, but Jana Murray will not. Jana's family described her as fearless and full of life, a woman whose absence left an irreplaceable void. Brittany's motives, pride, anger, perhaps desperation, remain debated, but the case endures as a chilling reminder of how an ordinary workplace conflict can escalate into unthinkable tragedy. Number 14, Ria Ramkissoon. Ria Ramkissoon was just 19 years old when she became entangled in one of Baltimore's most haunting criminal cases. Born in Trinidad and raised in Maryland, she had converted to Christianity as a teenager and longed for spiritual belonging. By the time she gave birth to her son, Javon Thompson, at 18, her life was marked by instability, a strained relationship with her stepfather, limited financial support, and an overwhelming desire to provide for her child. When she encountered a small religious group led by a woman calling herself Queen Antoinette, Ria believed she had finally found a community rooted in faith and structure. That search for belonging, however, became the very path that led to tragedy. Within Queen Antoinette's home, rules were absolute. Members surrendered their possessions, cut ties with family, and devoted themselves to Antoinette's interpretation of God's will. Over time, Ria was increasingly isolated and vulnerable, her sense of self replaced by fear of divine punishment, and the belief that disobedience meant eternal damnation. In early 2007, tensions in the cult reached a breaking point when Javon, just 16 months old, failed to say amen after a meal. Antoinette declared that the child harbored a spirit of rebellion and ordered that he be denied food and water until he complied. Ria, consumed by fear and convinced she was following God's command, obeyed. Over the following days, Javon grew weaker. Even as Ria's maternal instincts screamed to intervene, the cult's control over her was absolute. When Queen Antoinette finally relented, it was too late. Javon died in his mother's arms. The group did not report the death. Instead, they prayed for resurrection, insisting that faith alone would restore the child's life. Javon's body was placed in a suitcase and hidden for over a year. By the time police discovered the remains in 2008, the case had become a chilling symbol of religious fanaticism gone horribly wrong. Ria eventually cooperated with authorities, testifying against Queen Antoinette and other cult members. In exchange, she received a suspended 20-year sentence with time served and mandatory residential treatment. The unusual plea contained a striking condition. If Javon were ever resurrected, she could withdraw her guilty plea. Though symbolic, the clause underscored the depth of Ria's lingering belief at the time of sentencing. Experts later described her as a victim of psychological manipulation, suffering from indoctrination so profound that she could not separate her own thoughts from the cult's teachings. Over time, Ria began to confront the reality of what happened and the weight of her role in it. I don't think it's settled, she admitted years later, reflecting on the loss, the weight of what was lost. This case leaves an unsettling question. When belief eclipses reason, where does accountability begin and end? Number 15, Erika Sifrit. Erika Elaine Sifrit was just 24 years old when she and her husband Benjamin carried out one of the most shocking double murders in Maryland's history. Erika, once an honor student and college basketball star from a well-to-do family in Pennsylvania, seemed far removed from the kind of chaos that would later define her life. Friends and family described her as active, friendly, and ambitious, a young woman who had once dreamed of law school. But after meeting Benjamin, a former Navy SEAL with a volatile personality, her path changed dramatically. The couple married young and opened a scrapbook store together, but beneath the surface, their relationship was fueled by control, thrill-seeking, and a dangerous fascination with pushing boundaries. In the years leading up to the murders, Erika's life took on darker undertones. She frequently used drugs, like cocaine and ecstasy, and her relationship with Benjamin became both obsessive and toxic. He was known to be controlling and prone to explosive behavior, while she increasingly mirrored his recklessness. Together, they cultivated an identity as modern-day Bonnie and Clyde, engaging in burglaries and minor crimes that escalated in severity. Their shared appetite for adrenaline would soon lead to murder. On Memorial Day weekend in 2002, Erika and Benjamin crossed paths with Joshua Ford and Martha Jenny Crutchley, a couple visiting Ocean City, Maryland. The two pairs met at a nightclub where the night began innocently enough with drinks and conversation. But when Joshua and Martha agreed to return to the Sifrits' condo, things took a terrifying turn. After accusing the couple of stealing Erika's purse, Benjamin pulled a gun. The night spiraled into violence. Prosecutors would later argue that the Sifrits terrorized Joshua and Martha before killing them, not for revenge or money, but purely for the thrill. The investigation unraveled almost by accident. Days after the murders, Erika and Benjamin were arrested for an unrelated burglary at a Hooters restaurant. Inside Erika's purse, police discovered the victims' IDs and spent shell casings. This evidence quickly connected them to the missing couple. When confronted, Erika confessed, though she shifted much of the blame onto Benjamin. Their stories conflicted, but the physical evidence painted a chilling picture of shared responsibility. Trials for the two were held separately due to intense media coverage. Erika was convicted of first-degree murder in Joshua Ford's death and second-degree murder in Martha Crutchley's. She was sentenced to life in prison plus 25 years. Benjamin received a 38-year sentence. Both would later divorce and attempt numerous appeals, all of which failed. Psychologists noted the couple's codependency and thrill-seeking tendencies, suggesting the murders were less about anger or financial gain and more about power and excitement. Even Erika herself admitted it was about the thrill and the success of not getting caught, and that chilling statement still lingers. How could two seemingly ordinary young people find excitement in ending innocent lives? Number 16, Sonya Spoon. Sonya Spoon was 24 years old when she committed one of the most disturbing crimes in Maryland's recent history, the murder of her own children. Born in 1990 and adopted from Russia as a toddler, Sonya grew up in the United States in what appeared to be a stable household. Her parents, Gary and Pivy Spoon, were well regarded in their Cheverly, Maryland community, and neighbors described the family as kind and private. But behind closed doors, Sonya's life was unraveling. A young mother of two 3-year-old Kayla Thompson and 1-year-old Aiden Spoon, she struggled with mental health issues and a contentious custody battle that would ultimately spiral into tragedy. In the months leading up to the crime, Sonya's behavior became increasingly erratic. Court records show repeated disputes with Kayla's father, Lester Thompson, over custody and child support. At the same time, Sonya expressed growing emotional turmoil. Online, posting song lyrics about emptiness and longing, and sharing photographs of her children captioned with bittersweet declarations of love. Less than a week before the killings, police had escorted her to a hospital for an emergency psychiatric evaluation after she threatened to harm herself and Kayla. Despite this alarming episode, she was released. On September 7th, 2014, while staying at her mother's home in Cheverly, Sonya suffocated Kayla and Aiden using plastic bags and duct tape. The motive remains uncertain, though investigators believed the escalating custody disputes and Sonya's deteriorating mental health played pivotal roles. That night, she woke her mother and confessed. Bobbie Spoon rushed to remove the bags and attempted CPR, but it was too late. The children were pronounced dead at a nearby hospital. Police arrived to find clear signs of foul play and took Sonya into custody. During questioning, she waived her rights and gave a detailed confession, though she did not fully explain why she had done it. The crime shocked the tight-knit community, not only because of the victims' ages, but also because neighbors had noticed no warning signs beyond Sonya's quiet demeanor and family tensions. Charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, Sonya was ordered held without bond. The case drew widespread media attention both for the chilling detail and for the haunting image of Sonya's mugshot, where she appeared to smile faintly. For many, this raised more questions about her state of mind and the depth of her instability. Experts have described her actions as rooted in severe psychological distress rather than malice. Still, the profound loss to the children's families and to the community could not be mitigated. Kayla was remembered for her playful songs and love of dancing, Aiden for his quiet, happy demeanor. Today, Sonya Spoon remains incarcerated, her future uncertain. The lingering question is one that haunts every parent who hears her story. How does a mother's love transform into such unbearable darkness? Number 17, Reetika Gina Vazirani. Reetika Gina Vazirani was 40 years old at the time she took her own life and the life of her 2-year-old son, Jahan Vazirani Komanyaka, in July 2003. A celebrated poet and educator, she held a writer-in-residence post at the College of William and Mary and had recently won the Anisfield Wolf Book Award for World Hotel and the Barnard New Women Poets Prize for her first collection, White Elephants. Born in Patala, India in 1962 and brought to the United States at age 6, she grew up in suburban Maryland. Highly accomplished, she was known as intelligent, warm, and lyrical, respected in the poetry community, and seen as a rising literary star. Despite this public image, those closest to her recall mounting emotional distress. She had lost her father to suicide as a child, and recurring themes in her work centered on identity, exile, and grief. In the days before her death, friends reported that she spoke of personal despair, requested a meeting with a local priest, and borrowed a Bible, all signs that she was in deep crisis. She left voicemails to 2 friends on the afternoon before the tragedy, saying she thought she was going to harm herself and asking them to check on her home. On July 16, 2003, while house-sitting in Chevy Chase, Maryland, in the home of poet friends, Reetika killed her son, Jahan, and then herself. When a friend entered later that day, prompted by Reetika's message, both were discovered in the dining room, lying parallel on the floor with 2 large kitchen knives nearby, and a note referencing her partner and Jahan's father, Pulitzer Prize-winning poet Yusef Komanyaka. Investigators classified the incident as a murder-suicide, though no formal legal proceeding followed her death. A handwritten note and voicemail messages were preserved by authorities, and her literary colleagues later gathered to honor her memory, remembering her poetic voice and asking how such tragedy could occur to someone so admired. Experts and friends interpreted her actions as the result of overwhelming psychological crisis. Some suggested she may have experienced psychotic or manic episodes compounded by deep depression and grief over her father's suicide and an increasingly fraught personal life. Her mentor poet, Rita Dove, reflected that in that moment she was truly insane. She couldn't find her way back to herself. And psychologists note that in rare cases, filicide, in the context of suicide, may stem from a distorted belief that one cannot abandon one's child, leading to the tragic logic of taking the child along. Reetika's motivation can never be fully known, but the convergence of creative brilliance, emotional isolation, unresolved grief, and suicidal despair formed a devastating force. Her poetry, filled with longing and tenderness, now carries an eerie weight, a legacy both luminous and haunted. It leaves behind a lingering question: how could someone capable of such lyrical empathy be overcome by such unbearable darkness